Tonight, I want to I'm going to call it like a little mini two-part message about why relationships fall apart. How can somebody that was best friends yesterday hate the person today? How can somebody that was in love no longer be in love? How can relationships fall apart? And I want to illustrate it. I'm going to call it relationship bombs. And tonight's the first one, but this, I don't know, World War I, World War II, but obviously another plane took this, and they're just flying through the air, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 bombs have fallen out of this plane. Now, right now, if you're on the ground, nothing's happened. But in just a few moments, how many know there's going to be absolute destruction? If the bombardier lined up correctly, it's going to fall on a factory that's making tanks, and that factory will be demolished. Lives will be destroyed. How many know that bomb doesn't mean anything right now, but when it hits its target, how many know it has the power to destroy? And how many know there are things that we can do, either knowingly or unknowingly, that can destroy relationships? And this is what I want to focus on tonight. I want to focus on 2: broken promises and broken trust. And here's the first one. Even Christians have conflict, but reconciliation is possible. Now, this is before the bomb, but I want to show you that even mature Christians have conflict sometimes. Even mature Christians can sometimes split apart. Acts chapter 15, Paul and Barnabas are taking the gospel to the Gentile world. Mind you, they are 2 mature Christians. They had been on a missions journey planting churches, and they said, let's go back and see how the new believers are doing. Now, verse 37, interesting. Barnabas wanted to take along John Mark. John Mark was Barnabas' cousin. Let's see. But Paul disagreed strongly. Now, Paul is the senior leader. Why? Because John Mark had deserted them in a previous location. I think it was called Pamphylia. We don't know why he deserted them. Maybe he got scared. Maybe they were throwing rocks. We don't know what the deal was. He could have been attracted to something in the world. He could have missed his mom and dad. For some reason, he left the team, though. But look at verse 39, what I want you to see. These 2 men of God, their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. Barnabas took John Mark and sailed for Cyprus, a good thing. Paul chose Silas, and then he went to Syria and Cilicia. Sometimes, and this one is perhaps in a positive light, did you know sometimes God uses division to realign his church? You remember a guy named Martin Luther? Martin Luther took, I guess it was a hammer and a nail of his day, and he was a priest, a Catholic priest, a theologian, and he nailed a paper called his 95 Theses on the door of a church. I think it was in Wittenberg, and it gave birth to what's called the Protestant Reformation. It was a change. It was at that time primarily a Catholic and Greek Orthodox church, but the Protestant Reformation was born. The Presbyterians came out of this. Episcopalians came out of it. I mean, it was just like church. The Lutherans came out of it. It's like the world came to grips with they had drifted from the Bible, and that was a positive thing. What would have happened if Barnabas had submitted to Paul as his spiritual authority? Now, why do I bring this up? His ministry on Cyprus was the last time you hear about the ministry of Barnabas. Paul spoke about him in somewhat positive terms in Corinthians a couple times, but you don't hear anything more about the ministry of Barnabas in the Bible, whereas Paul goes throughout the whole Mediterranean world. Paul's ministry affects Europe, and ultimately it affects America. And I'm going to suggest to you that if he had submitted to what was clearly the spiritual authority, it's just possible he could have worked through it and he could have gone on to something greater in life. He did something good, but how many know sometimes there's a difference between something good and something better? The fourth one is, what if they'd sought godly counsel before they split up? Now, we don't know, again, this is some speculation, we don't know, but what if they would have sought and submitted themselves to a godly person? Because how many know godly relationships, matter more? Something has to, when we're trying to pull apart, has to keep us together, even if it's just the fact that, listen, we're a believer. Our marriage represents Christ and His church, and we're going to work through this thing. Timothy, 2 Timothy 4:11, bring Mark with you. You remember Mark was the one that caused the problem. Bring Mark with you when you come because he's helpful to me in the ministry. So here we see Paul now, as some time has passed, he's writing to Timothy, his son in the faith, bring along Mark because now there was some restoration. How many know as Christians, and I share this to begin with, there is hope for you if your relationship is in trouble. There's hope for you if your relationship is pulling apart like a piece of gum or silly putty. There is hope because God is a God of restoration. A broken promise can destroy a relationship. Now let me read you the way relationships should work. This is Genesis chapter 50, verse 14. Joseph, his daddy had died. And he approached Pharaoh's advisors and said, tell Pharaoh that my father made me swear an oath, take my body back to the land of Canaan and bury me in the tomb I've prepared for myself. So in other words, he goes to his son. He says, son, I want you to promise me I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want to be buried in the promised land. And anyway, he agreed. Well, after his burial, here's what Joseph said, I will return without delay. And Pharaoh agreed. Pharaoh agreed to Joseph's request, and after burying Jacob, Jacob returned to Egypt. This is how healthy relationships work. We give our word, and we make a promise, and we do it. Let me say it again. We give our word. So now let's speculate a little bit, but what would have happened if Joseph didn't return? In other words, Joseph said, I'm going to bury Daddy, and I'm coming back to Egypt. But what if he'd have got to the promised land and thought, you know, this is a pretty nice place to live here. And God told Abraham that this is where the children of Israel would live, and I think I'm just going to stay. One or two things could have happened. Again, speculation, but I mean, Pharaoh could have basically said, well, it's no big deal. He saved us from the famine. We've still got plenty of grain, and he could have forgotten about it. But how many know there's something else that could have happened? Pharaoh could have gotten mad because the bomb was dropped when he broke his promise. And Pharaoh could have gotten mad, sent his army after Joseph, and brought Joseph back and made him a slave together. But what's my point in saying all this? When we do what we say and keep our promises, we keep a relationship strong. When we do what we say, it makes people feel secure when they can believe us. But if we don't keep our word and break our promise, the opposite happens. So now let's get to some solutions here. What do we do if we broke a promise and damaged a relationship? What if you broke your word? This is not rocket science. Tell them you were wrong. Tell them you were wrong, ask for forgiveness, and then do what you promised. But now let me flip it. And what do we do if a person broke their promise to us? Somebody gave a promise to you and it was significant. What do you do? Well, let me suggest this to you, and this is hard for me because I expect and want you to come to me. Here's what you do. First of all, friend, you need to talk to them when your emotions are under control. Don't do it when you're crazy. Find out why. Tell them how it made you feel. Because some people are just too brain dead to understand. And then you need to forgive them no matter what they say. To a broken promise. But now when trust is broken, relationships can be destroyed. Let's talk about trust. What does trust mean? To trust you means I can rely on you. I am confident in the integrity and honesty of your life. See, trust is earned over time, but it can be erased in a moment. Let me say it again. Trust can be earned over time. Now, I've been here 32 years. Well, would you trust me if you found out that I was using church funds to go on expensive turkey hunts around the world? No. Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Trust is earned over time, again, as I said, but can be lost in a moment. And the Bible talks about the pain of broken trust. How do we build trust in the first place? Let's say you're starting a relationship with someone, you're kind of ground level. Well, the most important thing you can do is keep your word. The most important thing you can do is keep your word. Do what you promised. Well, if I fail and trust is broken, most important thing, be honest about your mistake. As hard as it is, how many know, the Bible says, there's a verse that says, be sure your sin will find you out, which means sooner or later it's going to come out. The worst thing you can do is cover up and lie. Well, I'm going to close with this as the worship team comes back. What do you do if someone has broken trust with you? So if you're on the receiving end of this bad activity and you're the one that feels hurt and violated, well, here's the first thing. If you're convinced they're repentant, you need to give them another chance. Now, hear me on this one. If they're lying and covering up, though, you protect yourself. And here's the last thing. You need to forgive them whether they're sorry or not. You need to forgive them because unforgiveness will become bitterness and will hurt you. See, I don't forgive you primarily for you. I forgive you for me. Because Jesus said, if I forgive men their trespasses, God will forgive me. But if I don't forgive men their sins, God won't forgive me. That's a hard thing to do. But I'll tell you what, friends, those bombs that fall out of those airplanes, I mean, no, we can shut the doors so they don't stop anymore, or we can repair the damage of what that bomb did. Come on, give the Lord a good hand today. He is worthy of our praise.